This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 118. Melanie Phung. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 118 of Experts in the Wire. Today's episode features a great discussion I had with Melanie Phung. One of the things I found most remarkable about Melanie is the depth and variety of experiences that she's had in so many different types of SEO, including the director of new media at PBS, which we chat about a little bit, but also with e-commerce sites, government clients, and currently as the owner and consultant at OrangeSpark Digital, she helps nonprofits, publishers, and B2B companies. On today's show, we chat about how to work on SEO effectively with big organizations, and when we work with content or tech teams, how to actually get them to execute your recommendations can be tricky in the world of SEO. Also, why understanding the history of a company, organization, and website is really important before diving in and giving recommendations. Things like, what do you do if you get pushback against your SEO advice? How do you instill SEO education within a company? And also, does Melanie listen to what Googlers say about SEO and ranking? All that and a lot more on today's episode. Before we jump in, I wanted to briefly mention an exciting new organization in the world of SEO. They're called United Search, and United Search is a first of its kind SEO Speaker Accelerator program. So you can visit unitedsearch.org if you want to sign up to be a mentee to learn how to speak, or to be a mentor to help others speak in the world of SEO. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them later on. But for now, let's jump into episode 118 of Experts on the Wire. Hey everyone, welcome to Experts in the Wire. I am very excited to have Melanie Phung on the wire with us today. Melanie, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. I'm excited to chat. We were connected by, her name's slipping in my mind right now. You remember her name probably. We were connected by somebody.
Catherine Ong.
Catherine, thank you. A mutual person in the SEO space. By the way, she just did a really great interview with Barry Schwartz on his vlog, so everyone should check that out. But she introduced us because she saw that I'm doing some current work with various parts of PBS, and you used to work at PBS doing SEO a few years ago.
That's right.
Right. So we have a little bit of a connection in a sense because of that. And we had an initial chat, and I thought you had a lot of great things to say about how to work with organizations like that, communication, dealing with internal politics and things like that. So I wanted to bring you onto the podcast to share some of that awesome knowledge with the listeners. First, though, can you give us a little context to what led you up to where you are now, and then describe what it is that you do now in the world of SEO?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So not a super straight path to where I am now, and I think that is very common in the SEO industry. A lot of us have taken winding paths to where we are. And as you know, it's such a complex and diverse industry that, what it means to be an SEO today could mean so many different things. So I started in SEO back in 2005. So I consider that the tail end of the wild, wild west, when lots of things were that's where we built that reputation of what SEO is that we're still to this day trying to shake.
Yeah.
And tell our clients, no, that's not what SEO is, but it was back then.
Why do you think that's taken so long to shake? And by the way, I will interject because that's very curious to me, and I think the listeners, that is still persistent. It's like 15 years later. So why is that, do you think?
I think as an industry, we collectively, whatever we quote unquote means, have not done a fantastic job with PR for our industry. I think especially early on, certain segments of the industry took a lot of pride and pleasure of being edgy and playing fast and loose and sticking it to the man and finding loopholes and shortcuts. And we celebrated that a little too much early on. And then we just never had a really unified voice that brought us together and talked about how important the work is that we do. And that's changed over time, but there are still a lot of bad actors.
Yeah.
Who give us a bad name. But I don't think that's unique to SEO. I think there are a lot of fields where people just aren't very good at what they do.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily have that same reputation that we have. So part of it is I don't know, and part of it is, we collectively somehow did this to ourselves and then just never pulled ourselves together collectively to clean up our own reputations.
Yeah, that's great for context to know that your history with SEO goes back that far. So continue us on that journey. So you started way back then. And then aside from PBS, what were some of the other companies or situations that you did SEO for?
Sure. Well, so back in 2005, I did SEO for a large e-commerce company. So cut my teeth on a site and then some satellite sites where I could really play with scale and making programmatic changes, right? So that's something that's really interesting and fun about e-commerce. You really have to get into the weeds, and you have to be able to make a lot of more technical changes.
Yeah.
That was a fun time though, because I really got to play in different areas, really changing product really. So one of the challenges, I'll try to do this quickly, at the cell phone company that I worked at is, they didn't think about SEO at all. They were just focused on building a platform and then also selling products. So they did two things, direct to consumer, selling phones and plans, and then B2B, spinning up a platform for affiliates and for major service providers to sell their phones. And most of the focus on the product was just the mechanics of selling the phones and the plans. And so their entire product catalog was behind a zip code form. You could not see any of the phones until you've entered where you live.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was one problem, right? So I had to rebuild the entire catalog a second time, right?
Wow.
So that was public facing. So that was one of the fun challenges. Our affiliates ate our lunch in SEO because they did things better than we did. So we had so much duplicate content that we pushed out that our affiliates outranked us for the content that we wrote. So then we had to build a content program. I hired on a writer to write two sets of product descriptions, one set of product descriptions that went to our affiliates so that they could all compete with duplicate content that we provided to them, and then our own version of product descriptions that was unique to us. So that's all scale things, right? That's not like a little bit here, a little bit there. The whole program has to work together or it doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
Then from there, I moved to some agencies where I learned more about different kinds of websites, like more sites where I couldn't play with scale and programmatic decisions like that, but I learned a lot more about how to work with clients, how to try to very quickly develop enough expertise in a lot of different niches to be able to advise the clients, to tell them what I thought, the agencies thought their audiences would want. So that was a lesson in quickly learning the domain of that client.
Yeah.
Then from there, I moved on to PBS, and I thought, great, I get to play with scale again.
Yeah.
But every client is different, and as you know, PBS is a completely different kind of organization and website than an e-commerce website. So I know we're going to talk a lot more about what it means to work in-house in a sort of very federated organization. But I loved my time there because I did not have to worry about, how do I teach people to write better content and to stop publishing junk, because PBS just doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
That's their entire mission. Yeah.
Exactly. So, that was around the time that major algorithms like Panda and Penguin hit, and a lot of the things that I had done in the olden days that wouldn't fly anymore, I didn't have to worry about that. I never worried that, an organization like pbs.org was going to be hit with penalties.
Right.
So that was nice. I could really just focus on how do we keep doing the right things, but do them better in a way that aligns with how people use the internet, not with how they had been working before, which is our content is all television content, and we have some supplementary information on the website in case anyone's curious, and really flip that model and figure out how do we make the website the destination that helps promote the television shows.
Yes.
And then from there, I had a wonderful 4 years there. Then I'd love to keep talking about that work some more. And then I moved to a startup where I did more D2C and B2B type work.
Yeah, excellent. And so currently, I believe, is it that you have a consulting company where you have a variety of clients?
Yes, that's right. So currently, I have a boutique consultancy where I work with associations, nonprofits, B2B organizations that will really benefit from learning how to optimize their content processes and how they think about content. I really try to take a holistic approach and help them see how to do digital strategy that includes SEO and is not like hyper focused just on like very specific technical or just content for the web. Because one of the wonderful evolutions that's happened in SEO is that it really has become part and parcel of so many other disciplines. It is no longer a standalone niche that can work completely independent of marketing and product and engineering and PR.
So that's a great segue. I want to talk first in regards to, we're going to talk a lot about working with these types of organizations in terms of how do you get them to actually get stuff done? That's a frustration and struggle a lot of people face. How do you instill education so they can be more sufficient with SEO on their own? And then we'll talk about how to communicate what's been happening with SEO for the organizations. But starting with getting them to take action, and you mentioned content. So let's talk about content teams first. When we're talking about the content creation, them executing it, et cetera, how do you start to think about getting internal content teams to actually execute good search content in a way that you would recommend?
Every stakeholder and every department and every organization is a case study of one. What I like to say is that it has to start with listening. The challenge is that you don't always have the time to spend a lot of hours building relationships and learning what each person's needs and fears and hopes and dreams professionally are. But it certainly helps. Right? You can't go into an organization either as a new in-house expert or as a consultant, like guns a-blazing.
I've done that.
Thanks for having this meeting with me. This is Melanie. You've never met me. I have this 50-page report on everything that you're doing incorrectly. And here's what you need to change about how you do your job. Whether you're working with product managers or writers, marketers, that's just never going to go over well. And
well, I like that answer right off the bat because you're kind of saying there's no formula, right? So I sort of set you up to imply, hey, give us the formula, right? Like fix it. But what you're saying is
here's this one pager. Like here's a checklist. Right. Just do this, you'll succeed.
Yeah. But what you're really saying is, when you enter the room or the virtual room nowadays, you have to, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, you have to meet those individual people where they're currently at. And so how do you kind of gauge, when maybe how do you gauge how quickly to go with the information or when people are feeling comfortable? Because that's, I've walked in that room before, like you said, super 110%, like, all right, 30 seconds in, here you go, here's your content plan, do it. But that's obviously too quick. So how do you gauge that speed and kind of pacing it for people, while at the same time not letting it, drag on?
Mm-hmm. I like to do a little bit of discovery depending on who hires me or who internally I think has the best sense of what the challenges are. That might be, my manager if I'm working in-house. I see all of these issues. Talk to me about the history. Like, why do you do it this way? Usually the person who hired me or either in-house or as a consultant, they're already on my side. So that's a little bit of an easier sell. I can just say, talk to me, between you and me, we obviously agree that there are things that could be improved. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. Why is it not this way already? And sometimes the answer is awesome because we don't know how, but we're super engaged. Everyone is on board and can't wait to meet you and just really wants to do this. That's the ideal scenario, right? But that almost never happens. Sometimes you'll learn something really important. You think, well, this is amazing. There's so many things that we could fix, right? I went into PBS and I thought, oh my God, there's hundreds of thousands of pages. So many of them are missing these like really basic elements. This is going to be so easy to make some huge wins. I'll be a superstar because I'm going to fix, like 250,000 pages in my first week. Easy peasy, low-hanging fruit. And then you go in there and you realize, well, contractually, for legal reasons, we're not allowed to touch any of those websites. They don't belong to us. They're supposed to be archived. The fact that they're still live, is only by agreement, and we're not allowed to touch them. So you would look really silly going into a meeting with a plan to fix all of these things that you're not allowed to fix, or there's a really good history and a reason why they can't be fixed. So you're going to lose a lot of credibility right off the bat if you're just shooting recommendations from the hip. You kind of have to understand, like, can you tell me why? And sometimes people don't know the right answers to give, but going into any meeting or relationship with just a little bit of humility, I think helps, and, that's a thing that I've had to relearn over time, and I don't always get it right. Yeah. But one thing that I try to remember is very likely if there's a difference of opinion, neither of you is necessarily wrong. Right? It's not that you know everything and the other person doesn't know anything. It's that they have different motivations and different needs than you do. So if you think the way that they're solving this problem or the fact that they're not solving this problem makes them wrong, you could be mistaken about what problem they're trying to solve. And if you keep trying to fix the problem that they're not trying to solve, you're not going to get very far. So first you have to figure out, like, what's happening on their end? What KPIs is their boss holding them to? What are they trying to achieve and why? And when you start there, then you can get to compromise a little bit easier.
And I see that I believe you work with some B2B companies, correct? So I wanted to ask a question around a specific example of something that actually happened with one of my clients. So I was hired to help with a B2B client for SEO. And then I was brought in and there were two people working on the content team specifically, writing blog content and resources that were not a part of hiring me. They might not even know my background or anything like that. And there were a few meetings when I would try to give them SEO advice for content, in terms of like nowadays using, topics and things like that, and thinking about sentiment, let's say, like the more modern SEO stuff. And generally I would receive sort of a passive pushback, right? Like essentially the message I received was, we don't need your input because we know everything we need to know about SEO and we're good. And I've gotten that it happens a few times. So, you're in this position when you're hired to help the client and you see improvements that could be made. So what would you say or do in a situation like that when, you have this writer or content editor in front of you that is not seeing the value in what you are trying to help them with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's not just content editors either, right? It's often engineers and software developers who feel the same way about their particular domain. You couldn't possibly know more than we do about the work that we need to do, and that's a huge challenge. I wish there were an easy answer to that. Again, if you can find a way to get them to not be defensive. And sometimes they walk into the room defensive, and it's really hard to get them to let their guard down. Ideally, you're not walking into the room with them already defensive. So if there's a way to massage that relationship, either directly through an introduction or through management, before you get in the room together, that's ideal because you want to solve their problem for them better, faster. So I think a lot starts with, what are some of the challenges that you're having? It's hard to believe that you have more leads than you need, that you don't need any more traffic, that everything is better than it could possibly be. So there must be something that you think could be better. Like not in your process, right? Because you're not doing anything wrong, but like what's holding you back? What points of friction do you have, and maybe come at it that way. Maybe their point of friction is something you can't do anything about, but maybe they think the quality of their leads is not good, or it takes too long to close the leads. So you can figure something out. How can my expertise help them fix that problem? And you don't always have to call it SEO, right? A lot of people come to the table with a preconception of what SEO is, and they don't want any of that. So maybe don't call it that, right? Because SEO is so many different things. You just say, okay, well, maybe I can help you close deals faster by helping you with the sales enablement process, by making sure that the leads that come in are a lot warmer, and here's how we can do that through content and through inbound marketing. And this is the way that content can help you get more people to the site, get them to understand the content a lot better, have them understand how what you're going to tell them matches what they were looking for. So it's always about problem solving.
How do you think about, I think you may know, as a subcontractor, I did a project for PBS NewsHour, one of the programs within PBS, obviously, because it's part of the name. And one thing that I mentioned to them, and I'm going to give the specific example so the listeners have something concrete, but you can feel free to answer in a more general way in terms of like how you might think about getting people to take action. I came to them with this idea of really improving their essentially their categorization of content, thinking about information architecture and upgrading tagging and things like that, which are very important to digital media sites and content sites that have a lot of content, but it's a very heavy lift, right? This is where I made the mistake. I kind of came into the first meeting. I was like, you need to redo it. I said it as like a one sentence thing as if they can just snap their fingers and fix it. But it's a really heavy lift. So this is less about, my question is less about selling the idea to them because they're pretty bought into it, but more about actually helping an organization get that done, right? Because it's a multi-process thing that would go in many phases. It really needs to be well thought out and managed. So how do you, and maybe especially as an outsider, right? Because you're more of a consultant yourself now and not in-house. It's especially difficult working outside of the organization. So using a project like that as an example, how would you think about, and what would you actually sort of do to get that executed?
These kinds of projects are really meaty. So making sure that you have the time to really dig in is ideal. There are a lot of consulting projects where consultants either want they either want to or can just write up some very quick recommendations and throw them over a wall and then say, take care of this, my work here is done,
Yeah.
I'll send you a Christmas card and see if you need me again. And with something like that, it can be so overwhelming. Large organizations that are very complex have tech roadmaps that have already been set for a whole year. You can't just drop something into it, like re-architect the entire website, and I'm not going to tell you how.
Right.
And in the meantime, you have all of these other things that you also need to do and that you've committed to. So as easy as you can make it for them, the better, right? And that might mean that you put together an in-depth strategy and plan in the roadmap, let them chew on it for a while, figure out what questions they have, how to do it, and then come back later. So you can't fix everything in the 3-month engagement that you have. Maybe it's like 3 months just to lay out a plan.
Right.
And then you have to come back in 6 or 9 months and keep going.
How do you interject? How do you lay out a plan? So for me, I might just put something in a Google Doc, right? So, because that can be complicated with if this happens, then do that. Like, do you just list it? Like, what do you actually, in terms of giving them for a plan, what does that look like?
It depends on the client, and one thing that might work, sort of depending on how much time and capacity you have, is to really get a lot of buy-in and socialize those ideas before you document it and send it, right? Because we get that same problem with a PDF report that you do walking into a meeting for the first time, where it sounds like you've already made a lot of decisions and this is final and no one's bought in yet, and now they're reading this thing that they haven't had input on.
Right.
So that can be a real challenge.
And does that also run the risk of what you said earlier, where you're losing credibility or trust potentially? Is that kind of the danger?
I think so.
And you're wasting a lot of time.
I think so. You're wasting a lot of time. It's not useful for you. It's not going to get executed. An organization or a project like that is challenging because it's just massive. Yeah. And as a solo consultant, for me, I find it challenging because I like to have wins, and it's really hard for me to have wins when I just don't know that the recommendations are going to get implemented, or it's just such a massive project that I can't get to the level of specificity that I think I need. This is one of those cases where I was very glad that I was in-house at PBS, because a lot of these projects took a lot of time. Right? I'd plant a seed, I'd make some allies, I'd get people to think that something was their idea. I would help them execute their idea, make them look good, get it aligned with their KPIs. And this could take a very long time. And it's all about, building relationships, and there's a lot of turnover. So this is a process that just has to keep repeating itself over and over. And you don't have the luxury of doing that as a consultant.
Yeah.
You're not in the room
Yeah.
making those decisions, building those relationships. So it's a little harder. So I would say get people bought into the idea, and then once you feel like you have buy-in, then you can document it in whichever way they like, right? Whether that's a Google Doc, slides, whatever way makes sense. But it's almost an afterthought. At that point, you should just be documenting what you've already agreed to.
I see. That's a really good way to think of it. Yeah, because I would jump right to the documentation a little quickly. Slight pivot, kind of based upon... Hey everyone, so as promised, I want to pause for just a moment to share more with you about United Search. And just to clarify, this is technically not a paid for ad spot. I reached out to United Search on my own to offer to help share with you, the audience, what they've got going on over there. So I'm very excited about this. United Search is a first of its kind SEO Speaker Accelerator program. It was created by several industry experts, two of which, Ashley Berman-Hale and Jackie Chu, have both been guests on this podcast. So simply put, United Search helps connect those interested in speaking in the world of SEO with top industry mentors who can help them polish their skills. The mission, though, which is what I really am excited about and 110% believe in, is that they want to see better and more diverse representation on stage, or the virtual stage nowadays, speaking at SEO events. I too do believe that the best SEO industry is the one that hears from all people of all backgrounds, cultures, experiences, etc. But as an industry, we're not going to just get there by sitting back and waiting for it to happen. So I'm very excited that United Search exists, and I'm able to support them here on the show. As a part of supporting them and essentially agreeing to partner with United Search, I am also personally pledging to do even better with this podcast to introduce you, the listener, to more diverse people, ideas, etc., which would keep making this show better and more valuable for you and the industry at large. If you're interested in speaking in the SEO industry, especially if you're from an underrepresented group, please go to unitedsearch.org/apply and fill out a very quick and easy form. If you're interested in being a mentor, please go to unitedsearch.org/mentors. So if you want to learn more in general, or you do think someone you know might be interested, to check out unitedsearch.org and follow them on Twitter at @search_united. Okay, let's get back into the conversation with Melanie. A little quickly. Slight pivot, kind of based upon what you said, which I think was very interesting. So as an outside consultant, because you can't have them re-architect the entire website and see a win from that in 3 months. They're not even going to do it in 3 months. What are the types of SEO things strategically that you try to bring forth as a consultant that you can actually help them execute and see wins from in a 3 to 6 month time period, right? Because some of what you recommend to them is based upon what can actually get done, right? And so with PBS NewsHour, I did bring up the topic thing because I think it's a huge deal, but obviously focus on other things. So what are some of those things for you that you see can be executed in a shorter time period?
I like to find things, and this might be different for every website, so it's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, that's fairly low effort, medium to high ROI. It might not be the kind of strategic work that I feel the best about, that I think, oh my God, this is amazing. But if I can get it done, that's a win, right? So it might not be the architecting the entire website, but if I know that there's some, like workaround canonicalization or robots.txt exclusions, just something that I think this should be fairly easy for them to execute. Get them to trust that I know what I'm talking about by delivering it in whatever way my intended audience finds credible. That would be best. Right? So when it's more technical things, I might spend some time trying to figure out, how do they like things written up? Like, can I deliver this like in tickets that are ready to drop into Jira? I'm going to write the user stories. I'm going to write the test cases. I'm going to link them to documentation about why. I'm going to tell them what problem I'm trying to solve without telling them exactly how to do their job, but guiding them in the way I want them to do it. They see that and they think, well, this all sounds very reasonable. This is how we talk to each other as engineers. I find this credible. Like, let's just do it. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And build like that. And in my experience, most teams don't like 50-page audit documents where they have to read every page and figure out how to turn that into something actionable. And again, not their job, right? Like, now you've given them work to do, but you're not their boss. Who are you? Right? So figuring out what they like and breaking it out into small, doable chunks that they can plug into the next sprint, just, to make me happy. That's ideal. With content, it could be something like, there's some way you've written things and your metadata is not ideal, rather than me spending a lot of time trying to tell you how you should fix things and trying to download like all the content SEO knowledge I have into your brains. I'm just going to do this for you. Like, let me just spend the beginning of the engagement just doing things for you, showing you, like, this part's not so hard. If we can do this for the entire site, over the course of several weeks, we're not going to see the results immediately, but we're going to do this in a couple of months. you'll definitely see the results and implement this way of thinking into everything you do moving forward.
Yep.
So,
and I think it is interesting what you said, how it depends, that's like every SEO's go-to phrase, right? Is it depends. But for example, when I work with like B2B companies or software companies, and I give them content ideas to create new content around, they'll have it done generally pretty quickly. But then I worked with another organization they basically publish like content. They're a university, but they publish informational content for businesses as well. It took about 3 months to get one piece of content done off of a topic suggestion. And that to them was an entire project. We dug into every detail and we tracked the whole thing. And fortunately, the results were good. Usually I try to depend upon maybe like 10 pieces of content and hope 3 of them do well or something like that. But we had to hit a grand slam with this one piece of content. We did, thankfully. But it is interesting, the pacing and what different organizations view as a project. Because for like a startup that's like funded and they're very intense and they have a very fast timeline, to them cranking out 10 blog posts is like nothing, even if it's at high quality. But to other organizations, one piece of content is like a huge deal, which I think is interesting.
In that particular case, knowing that creating something new is very difficult, and I do work with organizations like that. I have one client that sets their content calendar a year in advance. So at the end of the calendar year, we put together the content calendar. And
how do you do keyword research?
It's a lot. It's a lot of research. I mean, luckily, I understand their field by now. But any suggestions to create content mid-year is met with a lot of silence, and then it ends up in the recommendation 6 months later, and they're going to implement it 9 months from then. So
let me ask you, are they in the financial industry? Because I have a client in the financial industry, and I gave them content ideas in March, and they're like, "We're not going to do these until 2021." So
they're in the medical health industry. So same thing, like the level of like research and expertise and compliance that it has to go through, like that's just their process. So in a case like that, I find there's just a lot more ROI in making changes to existing content, and that's where we're going to see the big wins and build the credibility, so that when I give them the content ideas for their annual calendar at the end of the year, they make it into the calendar because they trust that I understand what they're talking about and who they are and their goals, and that I understand the space and how to win in SEO. But then you have to pivot, and instead of banging your head against that brick wall until you're bloody, figure out, is there something else that I can do? Let's do this new content at a pace of 1 every 6 weeks, but maybe we can fix the old content instead.
Yeah. And then that gives me a great segue into, I want to talk about instilling education internally as well, because one thing that comes to mind, if I'm recommending content updates, at the beginning, I'll give them specific recommendations for exactly what to update. Like, here's a great new title. Here's how to update your structure, the headings, even exact internal links, or like whatever. But after a while, it doesn't make sense for me to do that. So I want to instill education within the organizations I work with, so their content team and writers can make updates and kind of have them learn what I would look for. And a lot of it, like SEO is tricky because every SERP is different. Every keyword intent is different. And I was just looking at what seemed to be 2 equal types of topics today from a client, right? Like 2 keywords that seemed the same, but when you go and Google them, the search intent is obviously different, even though it's the same type of keyword in both cases. So that's kind of my long-winded way to ask, how do you start instilling education within organizations, and maybe let's focus that thought process around, like, first, in terms of getting them to update content. How do you get the teams to know what to do there?
A lot of being an SEO consultant and then also being sort of an in-house hybrid consultant at a large organization is about being a change agent. Right? So education is not a one-time thing. It's not a thing that you can tell your audience to do once and then they'll do it forever. That's a thing that I had to learn at PBS, is everyone is distracted. They have their own jobs that they need to do. You're basically asking them to do extra work. And it takes time. And so you can't give up. You can't have one webinar and then throw up your hands in frustration and say, no one did the thing that I told them to do. You have to go into it expecting that you're going to have to talk to them multiple times and get them excited about how this is going to help them achieve their goals, and maybe tell the story in a couple of different ways. And, one thing that I've learned that I still believe to be true is, if you're working with an internal audience of, several dozen people, maybe 100 people, it is so much better in terms of scale to get 100 people to just do a little tiny bit.
Yes.
Right? If you can get 100 people every time that they're thinking about content, thinking, how does this answer a user's question? What is someone looking for when they search something where my content is supposed to show up? Getting them to think that way every single time scales so much better than getting 2 people to be at your level in terms of SEO and doing the keyword research and doing the search intent. Teaching someone how to do keyword research is very, very hard.
Yeah.
Much, much harder than just teaching them how to write a decent title tag. Yeah. And maybe that effort isn't worth it. You have to figure out, you can tell them and teach them, over a couple of courses, what it is and how to do it and why it's important and some of the pitfalls. But at the end of the day, if they won't do it and they can't do it well, because it is a difficult thing to do, I think we take for granted, because we've built a lot of intuition over the years, how difficult it is to get people to switch their mindset from this is what I'm trying to say to this is what someone might be looking for. Then maybe it's not that's not work that you want to keep doing over and over. Maybe there's a couple of people who are good at that and they become the go-to. Maybe there's more of a feedback loop where people come to you and say, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? You give them feedback, then they go write the piece. It's more high touch, but then you're their partner. They trust you. They don't have to do quite as much work. You can help them with that. You're not writing a full content brief that you spent 4 hours doing the keyword research on. You just let them do it. And with an organization that's really focused on content that has to be produced because there are reasons for it other than SEO, doing one-off keyword research is a little bit easier than starting with the keyword research and then figuring out what to write about. Right? And most organizations, unless their business is to generate organic traffic, they're not, except at the start of a redesign project, they're not going to spend hours and hours doing keyword research about their niche, then developing a content strategy, and then creating content based on that strategy. Instead, I have to write this piece of content about this new product we're releasing. Do I write it this way or do I write it that way? Right? And if they're just focused on that latter use case, it's not as good. It's not as strategic, but it's going to get you compliance a lot faster. They can do that. That might take half an hour. It's not a 50-hour project.
And so what are the mechanisms that you like to use when instilling education? I know you mentioned webinars. Nowadays in person is not possible. I've when that was possible, I was going in-house whenever I could to give educational sessions. But are there any other ways that you found work really well for instilling education within organizations?
Everyone learns differently. When you're trying to educate a lot of people, webinars are good. Tacking onto conferences. So depending on what the company is, they might have big get-togethers anyway, and so tacking on a breakout, a workshop that you can hold in person. People really seem to enjoy that. People like being really hands-on. They don't want to watch someone do keyword research. They need to be trying things out in real time, hands-on. So giving them some tools that are easy to use and free and aren't going to take them way out of their usual workflow can be fun. So
I remember in my work with WGBH, which is part of how I am working with PBS, I showed a couple writers Answer the Public, which then was totally free. This was a couple years ago. And they thought it was like the best thing since sliced bread they've ever seen. Their eyes lit up. They're like, oh my God. And I went back a week later and they're like, look, we're using, I was blown away. And I think it points to what you said earlier, like how as SEOs, we take what we do for granted sometimes, like keyword research, but to them, they had never seen a tool like that before in their lives. And it totally blew their minds. So I think like what you said, giving them a free tool. And I actually, in my work with Masterpiece, I gave them alsoasked.com, which pulls the people also ask questions. To me, that's just like simple little boring in a way tool. I mean, not really boring, but you know what I mean? It's just like a simple tool, like no big deal to me. They love it. They use it all the time. That's not just them, like other clients as well. So I like that idea of just, hey, here's this free tool, because it kind of gets people, like you said, more interactive and excited about doing the SEO.
Yeah, make it fun. See if you can, make it a little bit of a competition. One thing that I've done in training with public media journalists is getting them to guess what an article is supposed to be about based on the title tag. That was
I like that.
Bad. Right? Yep. Like, okay, so let's pretend this actually showed up for something in the search results. What is it about? And if they can't guess, that's an aha moment. And then we have a competition where we can see who can rewrite it in the best way. Like you have, 155 characters. Figure out what you think this is about. Like in like 2 or 3. Like what's the search term? First, we have to do some education about what a query is. All right, what do you think this is about? What question does this answer? Okay, now I'll give you 5 minutes to come up with a new title in 150 characters, and then we're going to put them all up on the screen, and you're going to vote on who did the best job. Right? That gets people really thinking and realizing, oh, this is actually kind of hard.
Yeah. I feel like there's a market out there for SEO training materials, like games and pamphlets, and like that game right there, even that you could make that into like an actual game that you could sell and give to people, or maybe now virtual. But if any listeners out there want to develop an SEO game we can all use for training, go ahead and do that. Let me know.
Yeah, and if you monetize it, we want to cut.
Yeah, exactly. So this has all been great. So far we've talked about getting people to do things, instilling education so they can be self-sufficient. But I also now want to talk about how you communicate progress and results, because oftentimes, like I'll take the Masterpiece situation, for example. I'll work week after week with the marketer for Masterpiece, and I've only met his bosses that actually look at results and care about those sort of things. I met them once. We had one meeting where we shared some results after our first project. How do you communicate results, especially to the upper levels where these are people that are busy? You might not have as many chances to interact with them or share what's going on with them. How do you keep them in the loop in a way that's beneficial for them, doesn't waste their time, right? Because they're so busy, but also communicates what you're doing with SEO?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that in terms of my consulting business. My client is whoever my point of contact is.
Yeah.
I try to figure out, what's most important to them, under the assumption that what they care most about is also what their boss is going to care about.
Yeah.
So I have not, and maybe this is something I should spend a lot more time doing. I've not cultivated necessarily a relationship with the CEO if my internal client is the CMO. So I'm spending a little bit more time figuring out, like, what do your weekly presentations to your boss look like, and what do you need? What metrics do they care about? Again, you don't want to assume anything. Right? Yeah. A lot of us like to assume, well, this is what I would care about if I were in your position, but not only am I not in their position, I'm definitely not in their boss's position. So
it is tricky because you're relying on your direct contact to accurately relay the information, or you have to rely on whatever report you give them to make it to that CEO's desk. And it can be, my fear in those situations is there can be, a game of telephone, or things can get lost in communication or translation. I've worked in situations where I've worked with a company for 3 months, things are going great. And then, you've seen it before, you get that forwarded email by your direct point of contact from the CEO saying, hey, why are we not ranking for this, this, and this? And, there's definitely a communication chain that's been lost there. So I almost wonder if building something like that into the process of the project would be something that could help solve for that, whether it's even just writing up a one-pager or something to ensure that it happens on a regular basis, that things are being communicated. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud as well, because I don't have an answer for that either. Maybe it's another one of those it depends situations, the dynamics of who you're working with exactly. But I do think it's an interesting challenge because it can be very hard. I mean, I've worked, I'm sure you have as well, worked for many companies where you never even ever once talked to the CEO. I mean, that wouldn't make sense at big companies anyways. But stuff's getting up to them at some level.
Sure. And as a consultant especially, but also in-house, these things apply across the board. If your internal advocate leaves and no one understands how valuable you've been, you're definitely at risk of being let go.
Yeah.
So in an ideal situation, what I would counsel everyone is, build relationships throughout the organization. Theoretically, the right thing to do. Challenging when your clients are remote, especially now when we can't fly in to do a meeting. But you can't really ask to join, an existing meeting with higher ups and other department heads, as a consultant. That's a little harder. In-house, you definitely can do that, but it requires some work. And if you are a consultant and you have a long-term relationship or engagement with a client, ideally you are getting a seat at that proverbial table so you can talk about what you're doing and why it's important, and at least let people know who you are. But making it easy, right? So asking questions. Usually my proposal process and contract includes something about what are the KPIs. I always ask, at the end of 6 months, what will make this seem like time and money well spent to you? And the client has to get back to me before I give them a proposal to figure out, this is what success would look like. And sometimes they haven't put as much thought into that as I would like, and that ends up not being the case. But then at least we're starting with the common understanding of, you said that if in 6 months we've done these things and we've seen these results, then we're doing well. And that's a good opportunity to catch some misconceptions too, right? If they come back and say, in 6 months, we expect to have 10x traffic and have made $1 million in top line revenue when they're currently making 5,000, then at the beginning, we need to have the conversation first.
Right. Do you create reports? To me, reports are a necessary evil. I don't like creating them. I'm not a fan of creating big documents, but sometimes you have to. So do you create, reports that you give to them formally at the end of a project or something?
At the end of a project, it depends on what kind of engagement I have. Right? Sometimes I'm asked to do an audit, and then the final deliverable is the report of what they need to do next. In terms of where have we come, how far have we come since the beginning, usually that's the sort of information that I'm providing and contextualizing on a monthly basis.
Yeah. That's what I try to do.
But not necessarily spreadsheets, because in my experience, with some exception, a lot of people just don't look at spreadsheets. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time building dashboards or creating charts that the client's going to misunderstand or not bother looking at. And I'm one of one of those like huge it depends people. I'm also a big like asterisk. Here's the context people. So it's really hard for me to do spreadsheets because I just always want to editorialize. Like, okay, well, before you draw any conclusions, here's what you need to know.
Right.
And that's then it's not a dashboard anymore. Then it's really more of an analysis and whether the client wants that or not.
Yeah, I'm always so on the fence and torn about dashboards because I see all of these amazing blog posts and people out there and speaking at events that, they're putting together these amazing dashboards, which is incredible, whether it's with Google Data Studio or some third-party tool or something like that. And half of me is always, thinking I should be doing that. Like, obviously, it looks like everyone's doing that. There must be something I'm missing or like not doing well. But then the other part of me has been doing SEO fairly successfully for a while and has never made a dashboard once, right? I've helped some other clients make some dashboards.
I'm so glad to hear that because I think if everyone is doing it, then the two of us are together and not doing it. And it's mostly because the clients that I've worked with, I just don't find them using them. They either don't want them or they want them and then don't use them and it's not actionable for them.
Right.
And so I worry that's a vanity thing, like a thing that I'm only doing to either make myself look good or it's busy work. It's a way to justify my hours every month. But if it's not useful, then I don't want to spend time or mental bandwidth either on my end or their end, putting together fancy dashboards that don't mean anything.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. So I had a few questions about sort of how you follow the world of SEO. Because one thing that I find challenging, especially lately with all the news going on in the world as well, is just following what's happening in the world of SEO, whether it be Google updates or like a new feature in Search Console or whatever. How do you keep up with everything? Do you, follow certain people on Twitter? Do you read the industry publications? What are your ways of just kind of keeping up with the information overload?
It really is drinking from the fire hose. And earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time on Twitter and reading, industry blogs and publications. And at the end of the day, it was too easy for me to get lost in reading and getting distracted and thinking that the noise was me doing work. With the kinds of clients that I have and that I like to work with, the day-to-day doesn't matter so much.
Yep.
It's really about trying to skate to where the puck is. Sorry, the opposite of that. Skate to where the puck will be.
Yeah, where it's going.
And keeping my eyes on the big picture, training organizations to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Based on what we think the algorithms are trying to do.
Right.
Because especially when you're working with a large organization, it's like trying to turn a cruise ship. Right? By the time we change the strategy and implement it and get everyone on board doing these things, it might be months. If this is a really short-term, tactical, fly-by-night tactic, undoing it is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Right? So, it's different when you're working with a really small, agile website. You can test things, do things, undo them if it turns out they're harmful. But you can't keep doing that at a large organization because it's a waste of people's time and you lose credibility. So I try to just work on the things that are long-lasting, that I don't think is going to get us into trouble, like long, big strategic things. Keeping in mind also that a lot of this very advanced stuff doesn't apply to a lot of organizations. Right? So really advanced SEO, that might be the case for a NewsHour or some of the GBH properties. But a lot of the clients that I'm working with now, they just need to get the basics right. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time chasing things that may or may not still be around in 6 months to a year because, it's not good use of time. But there's some things that that Google takes back. Right? That happens all the time. I've spent a lot of time saying, well, this seems like a long-term strategy that's going to have ongoing ROI, and then they take it away. But us doing that wasn't harmful.
Right.
It was just we thought this was going to stick around. I'm sorry, which one?
Like rel author, rel equals author.
Rel author is one. For Ajax websites, I spent a lot of time getting the product team to implement escape fragments, and then that went away.
Huge one. Yeah.
Yeah, that was big lift. Fun technical project. I've had huge success with featured snippets for a big content site, and it was the right strategy to pursue at the time. We saw tremendous success with it when they rolled out the change in January. Huge drop in traffic because we'd been so successful with it. Wasn't the wrong strategy at the time because really it pushed us, it solidified our top 3 positions. It's not like we were penalized, but man, that second listing really turned out, earned us a lot of extra organic clicks. So that's a case study for having 2 listings on the front page definitely improves the traffic to your site.
Yeah. So you're referring to, just for listeners, when Google quote unquote deduplicated the feature snippet, which I do not agree with at all. I think that is not a great thing. I think that people look at the feature snippet as different than the results. I don't think it looked like duplication to me, but that's just my soapbox. How did you go about, I have to ask, now that you mentioned you had success with feature snippets, how did you go about getting those snippets? Was it something technical? Was it what was the actual SEO mechanics behind that?
It was all content, and I'm very lucky that with this particular client, they had good content. They had top of page ranking, so I identified all of the pages where they had top 5 rankings, and then instituted sort of the common best practices for getting into the featured snippet spot. I figured out what kind of snippet is it possible to get? Is it a list snippet? Is it a paragraph snippet? Then I went in and rewrote those already very strong pages to make sure that it complied with, the character counts. Okay, this information is buried in this website or on this web page. I'm going to move it to the top of the page and reduce it to 65 characters, and boom, got it. Or great information. It needs to be in list format, all of the stuff that they're writing about in paragraphs. Let's summarize it in a list. Boom, that worked, right? But that only worked because they already had very strong rankings.
Right.
And then when they lost the duplicate or the second listing for those results, I didn't go back and then undo that or change it. Right? So either they had the featured snippet or they were still in the top 3, and that was fine. But that's an example where I pursued something that was sort of in the moment and not just a generic right for the user kind of advice. It's right for the user, but in a way that gets me that spot. So that was really interesting. Now that that featured spot doesn't earn us as many clicks anymore, it's no longer a main strategy for me now. The ROI on winning that box isn't as high. So
yeah, I've also stopped really focusing much on trying to get featured snippets for that exact reason. How much do you listen to what Google says? Whether it's maybe the webmaster trends analysts like John Mueller or Gary Ish, or even their documentation, stuff Matt's Cuts even said years ago, is still things people would follow. When Google comes out and they said something like, it doesn't matter if you're on a subfolder or subdomain for a blog, for example. I know a lot of SEOs argue about that. I think it's a total moot thing. I think it's, something else entirely. But how much do you sort of try to pay attention and follow the different things Google is saying? From anything from a comment John Mueller makes in a Hangout to something more official like their blog posts.
Yeah, it comes and goes for me. It depends on what's happening in the industry and where my clients' pain points are. I try to like at least have enough of my ear to the ground on like major changes so that I can keep my clients apprised of what's happening and how it might impact them or not. Often it's like, here's a thing that's happening. I want you to know that I'm aware and I'm watching it. I don't think it's going to impact you. So in terms of following what they're saying, I like to know what they're saying so that I can share that with my clients, but it doesn't change my strategy day to day very much, because I feel like usually when they come out and say something, it should be something we already knew.
Yeah,
right? It's usually very rarely like, oh my God, like now I've got to change everything about the way I think about SEO. It's usually like right. We've been saying, here's some guidelines, or you should have guessed this already. Right? Yeah. But it helps me.
Yeah, sorry.
It helps me document to the client, like I'm not the one saying this. Google's the one saying this.
Right. Yeah, when John Mueller recently said something about like, guess what? On your category or product pages, you should have transactional text. Is like, duh.
I mean, that was. I remember that. I remember that being something I wrote up a strategy in 2005 in my e-commerce days when anything went. So that's old news.
Right. Yeah. So it is funny when he'll say things like that. A lot of people go crazy because you're right. It's something that if you're doing, practicing SEO, you should sort of know in some degree. I mean, maybe you haven't had the confirmation of somebody from Google putting their stamp of approval on it, but like you kind of know the right thing to do in those situations. So I think that definitely makes sense there. As we wrap things up, great discussion, by the way. I can't wait to share this with the audience. Tell everybody where they can find you online, whether it be website, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the best places.
All the best places. I tweet very irregularly on Twitter at Melanie Phung. Most of my hanging out on the internet these days is in Slack communities, so I'm not quite so public anymore. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter.
I was wondering that because I was having a conversation with somebody that was very involved in SEO, and back in like 2012, he stepped away for a while, and he came back and he's like, "Where's everybody?" Like it wasn't like SEO Twitter in 2012. That was like the happy day. Like, so I'm not in any private SEO communities or any communities like Slack or otherwise. Are these SEO communities in private Slack groups?
Sometimes they're SEO adjacent, like a Google Analytics Slack that I'm in. Hashtag Measure is good. There's a very active Slack community called OG Marketers, and it's mostly marketing, but including SEO. There's a dedicated SEO Reddit Slack, which is surprisingly high quality. They're very noisy, and one of the challenges that I have with SEO Twitter, as it used to exist, and just SEO communities and conferences, it's a lot of SEOs speaking to other SEOs, which is great, right? That's how we learn. Yep. But a lot of the work that I do really requires me to better understand and interface with my peers in related industries. So I like sort of having SEO conversations with content strategists or analysts or product managers or designers, and going out into other communities and talking about what I know with other people who know something else. Yeah. I found more satisfying rather than like sort of being in that echo chamber of being an SEO for SEOs.
Yeah, I love that. One of the best conferences I attended, just a day conference, was UX Boston or something like that. It was a UX event, but
I love great. UX events.
Yeah, because UX impacts SEO, and I had some great conversations with people that thought SEO was still shady, the way it was in 2005. So, okay, sorry to interject, but I thought that was interesting just in terms of like where people are communicating. And then, so Twitter, and where else can people find you?
LinkedIn, my website, Orange Spark Digital. I'm not super public, but definitely open to people reaching out to me and us having conversations, over email or setting up phone calls, or in those Slack communities.
And one last question. So I saw that you do some photography. I've done that sometimes myself. It's just a fun hobby, but mostly on the creative side, I do a lot of music. How have you found that photography has impacted your SEO work in any way?
Not at all. I like to keep my hobbies very separate from my work life. I like to compartmentalize. I am a big believer that you don't have to monetize your hobbies. And, I like work to be work and then to have some hobbies that don't turn into work. So,
what about
it has not. I like having mental breaks. Like that kind of work can be meditation. And when you clear your mind, it's nice. You come up with solutions, right? When you don't constantly have stimulation like podcasts or videos or articles or things you're reading on the web. If you just quiet your mind, sometimes you solve problems. I'm sure we've all had sort of like those shower moments where you come up with the solution that you've been struggling with. So photography is a way to do that. But my photography is almost more of an outcome of another hobby I have, which is street art. So the photography is right now just documenting my street art hobby. So it's less about taking photos and more about.
I see. That's cool. Thank you for joining us on Experts in the Wire and for humoring me and the listeners with the last question about photography. I think it's very interesting. And thanks for joining us. And we'll see everyone next time on Experts on the Wire.
Thank you so much.